Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this webinar on behalf of VLA Virtual Legal Advisory. As most of you would know me, I'm Sana Pirzada, and I'm the founder of VLA. And with me, I have a very special guest today. I've got Mariam El Awa, who is a lawyer and lecturer who's joined us live from Egypt. Mariam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sana. It's my pleasure to be with you today, despite the topic we're going to talk about. But thank you very much for reconnecting and for having me.
Such a pleasure, Mariam. I'd like to tell the audience that Mariam and I both are part of the King's College London alumnus, and I have been proud to be her friend for years. I'm proud of the wonderful work that Mariam has been doing. She is spearheading the law firm, El Awa law firm in Cairo. And Mariam, as you rightly said, today it's actually very unfortunate that we have finally reconnected at a very solemn time when so much of tragedy is all around us. Though it delights me from the bottom of my heart to see you, obviously the topic that we're going to discuss in the next hour or so is truly very, very heartbreaking. And I'd like to actually commence this webinar with expressing my condolences to everybody who has lost their lives during this war. Women, children, and the elderly. The loss of every life is a tragedy. So my deepest condolences to the families. Before we officially commence, and obviously, Mariam, I am so looking forward to discussing some of these very pertinent matters with you. Just to enlighten the audience with a few details, which I'm sure that they've already seen on the news, I'd like to actually share a PowerPoint, and then we can proceed. Is that fine?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, VLA is basically a consultancy, and we deal primarily with family issues and criminal justice issues, but we also advocate for human rights, for mental health, and for a number of other legal and social issues. Now, presently, this particular crisis that has taken place in Gaza is this humanitarian crisis, rather, is absolutely devastating. And the purpose of this webinar is actually to highlight some of the legalities that are at play over here. So just moving on from here, I've just got a few slides to show the audience. A lot of it is available online, which is where I've got it from. You may have already seen it on the news channels as well, but I've sort of condensed all of this information here. So this image on the screen is an image of Gaza. It's an aerial shot, and it's by Sky News before the bombing started. And as you can see, the infrastructure is very much in its place and everything looks fine. And this, unfortunately, is the image after the bombing. As you can see, the infrastructure has razed to the ground, and what was pretty is now white. Of course, it's all been destroyed. So these are some really heartbreaking images. Again, this is a closer shot of the destroyed infrastructure. And I've got quotations over here from the various different United Nations departments. There's one over here: the reality today in Gaza is that there is not much humanity left and hell is settling in. And the United Nations has actually been very vocal in highlighting the plight of the people of Gaza post the bombing. Mariam is going to go into these details once we officially commence the webinar, but just to highlight that when we talk about wars or bombing, the Geneva Convention has been very clear in terms of highlighting the humanitarian spirit and also in highlighting the sort of people who are not supposed to be the part of the conflict, who are not supposed to be bombed. And as we can see from these statistics, which as I speak have gone up drastically, unfortunately. There have been over 170 attacks on the healthcare in the last couple of weeks. In fact, the figure has gone up now. Just to let all of you know that international humanitarian laws protect those who are not fighting, as I said. Targeting civilians is a war crime, and Mariam, will be kind enough to shed more light on the Rome Statute and other relevant conventions. You cannot destroy things essential for their survival. So other things that we've seen being cut off, like fuel, medical aid, etc. Medical workers must be allowed to do their job regardless of whose side they're on, and human dignity in times of war. I've got a question mark over there because this is the biggest question mark, which we will be discussing today. How many people have been killed in Gaza so far? Again, these statistics go up as we speak. So I'm not able to 100% say that this is what the statistic is as I talk. It may have gone up. But as of last night or early this morning, over 7,000 Palestinians unfortunately lost their lives. Over 3,000 were children, which is in fact what we'll be focusing on more during this webinar. 35 UN workers, I think again this figure has gone up to over 50 now, have lost their lives, and between 30 to 40% of those who are wounded in Gaza are children. Again, this is from CNN, and you've got these images in front of you, and so many more that you've already seen on TV. The entire theme of this topic is that international humanitarian law is there to protect these innocent civilians, and despite that, the bombing is going through and has torn all of this humanitarian laws into smithereens. The situation in the Gaza Strip is a growing stain on our collective conscience, again from UNICEF, a very powerful quote. So I'm just going to move this box. And again, the main focus is that in all wars, it is children who suffer first and suffer most. Again, a quote from UNICEF. And I've got these hashtags over here: crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, because this is essentially what we are going to be focusing on. So very painful indeed. I'm just going to stop sharing the PowerPoint. Mariam, firstly, thank you again officially for being with us and for listening so patiently as I went through the PowerPoint and for seeing all of these heart-wrenching images. I'll start by asking you, Mariam, if you could kindly explain, the context of this war, and also if you could move on and explain the general sentiment in Egypt.
Thank you, Sana, for the presentation and for the efforts you put in collecting the information. As a legal researcher, I know how much time and effort research takes, especially when it is a topic so close to heart about the suffering of children and women and those who has no say in the war that's ongoing in their land. Antonio Guterres said that this that happened on the 7th of October did not happen in vacuum. He said, there has been an occupation, ongoing, suffocating occupation for 56 years. And this expresses or reflects the position, the official position of the UN. But what are the facts behind this position, which is very, very good, by the way. We were not criticizing him. We're saying, thank you very much for standing up for the truth for the week the other day in the Security Council and saying this, which brought on you a lot of anger from those who do not see us as humans, but as human animals. And we quote the official Israelis who said this. What happened, ladies and gentlemen, my audience, our audience, is that in 1948, at the beginning of the year, or let's say in 1945, there was no Israel. There was Palestine occupied by Britain, just as Egypt was and many other countries. In 1948, Zionist paramilitary groups attacked Palestinian villages, cities, committed mass massacres, killed thousands of Palestinians, women, children, peasants who were not armed. The people going about their daily lives, killed them all, forced the rest, the remaining thousands, out of their homes. They became refugees in their own lands. That day, the Israeli groups, gangs, the armed gangs, took over the vast majority of the land of Palestine and then declared the establishment of the State of Israel on Palestinian land. No surprise there, the occupation gained international support and the State of Israel was recognized by many countries across the world, just not the Arab countries and some other Muslim countries in Asia and maybe in Latin America or Southern America. Let's highlight that 1948, that was the time when most Arab countries were under the occupation, the French occupation, Italian occupation, British occupation. It was a time when occupation was there. Egypt had treaties with Britain, but officially we had military British troops on our land as well. 1948 was not the beginning. The beginning was in 1929 when the people of Palestine realized that there are severe, intense attempts to change the nature and the identity of Jerusalem by moving more Jewish people into it, and then started a revolution called the Buraq Revolution. You can Google it and learn more information about it. It was resistance against these attempts and resistance against the British troops in Palestine. But that did not succeed. It ended with the 1948 establishment and declaration of the State of Israel. This position continued until 1967. The State of Israel had gained more international support, more power, more military power, and by mass force, tanks and airstrikes, they took in 1967, the remaining parts of Palestine, mainly Gaza Strip, which is the main topic of today, and the Egyptian peninsula of Sinai, and the Golan Heights in Syria, and southern parts of Lebanon. So it was an invasion that entered into 4 countries, 4 Arab countries. But luckily, international support for this invasion was not there that much. Even the Security Council in the United Nations ordered its resolution number 242, calling for immediate retreat of the Israeli forces from the lands occupied in 1967. Did this change anything for Israel? No. They did not abide by this resolution. They disregarded what the international community agreed on and continued their occupation of these lands until 1973, when Egypt and Syria launched a war to liberate, and I repeat, liberate their land, their occupied land. Egypt was lucky, not lucky, they made a lot of effort, lost a lot of lives in this war, but they managed to do is liberate and take back Sinai from the Israelis. The Syrian troops were not as successful, and Lebanon was not part of this war, but with the major participation from the armed resistance in Lebanon, they were able to take back most of the southern lands occupied by Israel in 1967 in the year 2000. And remember, the year 2000. So this went on for over 30 years, this occupation. From 1967 until 1993, there was attempts at resistance. It was not strong. It was not that powerful. Some attempts took place outside of Palestine, some inside. And many of you might have heard about the Intifada of the rocks. Children threw rocks at the tanks, at the Israeli soldiers. It continued for a couple of years, and then there was another Intifada in the year 2000. Between the two, in 1993, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was the most, I wouldn't say prominent is the best word to describe it, but it was the most recognized by other countries, the most Palestinian organization recognized by other countries. It entered into an agreement called Oslo Accords with the State of Israel. The aim of this agreement was to start a peace process, to achieve a peace treaty based on what I mentioned, the 242 resolution of the Security Council, and to liberate the lands by peace. I repeat, by peaceful agreements and discussions and negotiations to liberate what Israel occupied in 1967. Did any of that happen? No, none of it happened. the peace talks were hindered. Israeli troops entered, I wouldn't say every day, but maybe every day in the last 2 years, into the West Bank, into built more settlements, illegal in the West, illegal in the EU, on the Palestinian land, and moved the citizens of Israel, what we call settlers, what the media call settlers, illegal settlers, into the land of Palestinians. They confiscated this land by force, supported by the Israeli army, the Israeli police, and took the Palestinian land piece by piece. As for Gaza Strip, the part of the world that's suffering the most today, they have been under siege by the Israelis for 17 years. Any supplies, food or water or electricity, goes through their border with Israel. If you have noticed from Sana's presentation, the Gaza Strip is surrounded from every side by Israeli borders, except from the west. There is a Mediterranean Sea, which is also controlled by the Israeli Navy. And from the south, there is a border, small border between Gaza Strip and Egypt. We will talk in a few minutes about this border and how it is controlled. But Gaza Strip has been under siege for 17 years. People there have been suffering from war launched by Israel every few years. These were only aerial attacks with once or twice ground invasion, but mainly airstrikes, killing civilians, killing people in their houses in the thousands. I'm not talking about the 10 or 20 or 30. I'm talking about casualties in the thousands, between killed and dead and injured. And most tragic, leaving behind so many handicapped people, young people in their primes, just about to start their life, and they've lost a limb, lost an eye, suffered an injury to the lung or the liver that does not give them a chance of a normal life. So that's how they lived so far. In the last year, Israeli troops intensified their attacks on Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the second most holy mosque in the Muslim religion. And they attacked women who pray there, kicked children out, kicked the praying people out. And this happened every day, allowing settlers and fundamentalist Jewish people to enter and pray in our mosque. This for Muslims is unbearable. This for the people of Palestine is unbearable. They consider themselves the gods of this mosque. They were put there to protect it. I forgot to mention, amid the conflict in the 1980s, Hamas was founded as a political group. Maybe a couple of years later, the armed group was established to support the resistance of the military occupation that occupied Palestine in 1967, according to international law, and in 1948 it began, according to Palestinians and Arabs. The official stance of the all Arab countries, and I believe most of Muslim countries, is Israel is an occupation. It has to retreat to the borders of the 1967. And Israel has never abided by any international call for this, gave no regard of it. What happened on the 7th of October was an attack by the resistance, by the military resistance. And I'm not going to name names because that doesn't matter. It is a resistance that was launching an attack on the occupation. Also, I need to mention that before the 7th of October, Israel kept in its prisons more than 6,000 Palestinians prisoner from Gaza, from West Bank, from the inside of the what we call the lands of 1948. And from the 7th until now, they have taken about, I think, 1,500 more from the West Bank alone. And 2 of those they took prisoners were killed in the prison. One of them 2 days later after he has been captured by the Israeli forces. Now, this is a background to show you what we see when we say Gaza, what we see when we say the state of Israel, what we see when we say the Israeli Defense Forces. Okay, Sana asked about what we feel in Egypt. What's the sentiment? Well, I think it's clear to you now. Egypt, in the vast majority, is pro-Palestine. The masses that took the streets this Friday, last Friday, and the one before in universities, in Tahrir Square, in Al-Azhar Mosque, which is the most important mosque in Cairo and in Egypt, all of Egypt. They chanted for Palestine, for free Palestine, and to my own surprise, they chanted for and cheered for the resistance that's fighting against the Israelis. So the people see this. What's the government feeling? What's the government doing? I believe that the government is doing publicly and behind closed doors everything they can do to stop the escalation, to open humanitarian corridors, to allow supplies into the Gaza Strip. How this yields, what it yields, how successful it is, we have no idea. Because as I said, a big part of this is done behind closed doors and understandably not done in public. But we don't see much effect, as will be said in the next few minutes of our interview. I have to say something about the resistance. The UN Charter itself, and I quote, says, "It is the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs." So the Palestinians were attacked in 1948, in 1967, and in Gaza Strip, they have been attacked every few years by air forces that's supposed to be one of the strongest in the world, bombing their houses, their mosques, their families. And the West Bank have been suffering of attacks and invasions by the ground tanks and forces, military forces, probably daily. You've heard about Jenin, about the refugee camp of Jenin, in Tulkarm, in Nablus, in Ramallah. Every day there are attacks by the Israelis, kidnapping, killing, and there's no stopping to that. Nothing has stopped them so far. So the sentiment in Egypt, and I dare to say in the Arab world, that what's happening is just a reaction to an occupation that lasted at least, by international standards, for 56 years without no serious attempt from the international community to stop it. So have you ever chased a cat? If you chase the cat, keep chasing it, it will run from you. But if you corner it, it will attack you. That's what happened in Gaza. And that's what we feel about it in Egypt. Antonio Guterres said, the events of the 7th of October did not happen in vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subject to 56 years of suffocating occupation. I think that sums it up, and we can see why this happened. Back to you, Sana.
Mariam, thank you so much for that. I think that this was very important to understand the background and the overall context, because it's true that many people have been witnessing, the bombing of Gaza for years. I remember in 2014 quite distinctly, because a lot of tragedy took place then. And again, there were images of children dying and all sorts of brutalities, pregnant women being killed. And with time and with the way the modern world is progressing, we tend to forget about these things. We tend to move on. Another catastrophe happened somewhere else, COVID happened, and then people tend to forget these things. But I think that at this stage, because as unfortunate as it sounds, and not my words, but words that have been shared by different news channels online, is that apparently this seems to be that we're on the brink of a third world war if the escalation continues. And if it does, then obviously, this is a modern day horror story, which we could never have predicted. We could never have fathomed the way things are now turning out. Having said that, what you've just explained has been extremely helpful, to understand the overall context and to understand the overall sentiment in the Arab world, to understand what is happening in Palestine and in Egypt as well, in terms of the people and their emotions. And as I said, for whatever is happening in Gaza with these innocent children, with the women, it's beyond horrific, and it's not just something that you and I are saying. It's something that almost the entirety of the world they share the same emotions. So thank you so much for that, Mariam. Just moving on, obviously, there's so much that you can tell us, and there's so much that we can learn from you. But because of time constraints, we are just going to move on to some of the more pertinent questions now. I understand from what I last saw on one of the news channels that apparently 62 trucks of aid have been permitted to enter Gaza so far. And I think that all of these trucks have come through the Rafah border. Correct me if I'm wrong. And even now, there are limitless trucks at the Rafah border. So, firstly, if you have that figure as to how many trucks are there presently at the Rafah border, how many are actually needed? Because at the moment, if you just let 62 trucks in it, that's not really enough for a population of 2.2 million. It clearly isn't. So, if you could just shed some light on what's happening at the Rafah border.
Thank you, Sana. I just like to emphasize that the demonstrations on the streets happened in almost many Arab countries, not just Egypt, in Jordan, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and also in Europe and America. Turn on Al Jazeera English, you might find some information that you don't see on Sky News or Fox News. That's I wanted to highlight. And then we come to the Rafah border.
And sorry to interrupt you. We had demonstrations in Pakistan as well, just to highlight that.
I really appreciate highlighting that because the connection between the Muslim countries is not just in the religion, it is in our causes. Our causes are so intertwined that we cannot say you are two different worlds, the Arab and the Muslim, especially in the case of Palestine, being the country of the holy city of Jerusalem. So Rafah, back to Rafah border. As I said earlier, Rafah border is the only border Gaza Strip has with any country other than Israel. There are international conventions that control how this or organize how this crossing is to be opened and when to be closed, who has the authority to close and open. Not all of this is readily available to the public, but back to the number you mentioned, you said 62 trucks. Simply, I'd like to say that every day, 500 trucks on a regular day, 500 trucks entered Gaza with the daily needs, the daily supplies for the everyday life, food, water, fuel, you name it, whatever people needed. 500 trucks daily entered the Gaza Strip. And if we talk about 62 trucks in 20 days, we're just sentencing them to die. I don't need to say any more, except that Israel up till today refuses to allow the entering of fuel. And because Israel cut off water, consumable water that you can, as humans can consume, cut off electricity completely, and any supplies from their side, fuel is the only way to keep generators working. Hospitals rely on generators, intensive care, surgery room, incubators for babies. People who have kidney problems, they have to do procedure at the hospital, open heart operations, labor and delivery of babies. The UNICEF said there's 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza Strip. 500 of them, I think, are about to give birth during the next few days. They need imminent care that currently the medical sector cannot supply because there's no fuel, there's no generators to work, and there's nothing. Even the medical supplies they're entering, it makes you cry and laugh. This is not what a country under war, under siege needs. They have over 15,000 injured persons. They don't just need the few that they got. They need serious help, and that, unfortunately, they're not getting. About the control of the supplies entering. The first day we saw 20 trucks entered directly from Egypt to Gaza. What we heard and what was published on news channels on the internet is that since then, the trucks enter from Egypt into Israel. Israel searches, the army searches the trucks, make sure that there's nothing they don't approve of. And you can imagine what kind of constraints they would have on the supplies Gaza gets. And then they move into Gaza Strip. So talking about supplies, I think the humanitarian institutions and organizations are doing all they can. We have seen representatives of foreign countries under the European Union on the platform of the EU talking that humanitarian aid has nothing to do with the war going between Israel and the militant groups. That's not the story. The story is supplies must be provided. So that's about Rafah crossing.
You know, Mariam, when you come to think of it, and um, because apart from my legal stuff, you know that I'm a writer. If you imagine living in a place where you are controlled, I mean, it's almost like that George Orwell 1984 novel, or and that element of well, I'm tempted to use the word totalitarianism, that everything that comes in and goes out is checked, approved, and you don't have your own autonomy. It's that in itself psychologically, and I know that we will talk about the psychology of all of this towards the end of the webinar, but it's just horrific, just the thought of it. And living in a society like Pakistan, where we have many freedoms, alhamdulillah, uh, we don't have any kind of fear, we don't need any kind of approvals. We're living in a country where apart from the problems that we do have, and a number of miscarriages of justice, which is a fact, we have many autonomies and liberties. So it's just, again, a very horrific thing to imagine. This is just something that I wanted to highlight. And in light of what you're saying, Mariam, now, you're right that the war is between two distinct entities. Okay, now in the middle you've got these innocent civilians. Okay, and all of these conventions, so when we talk about the Hague Convention, the Geneva Convention, the creation of the International Committee of the Red Cross and all of its different branches, they also, which basically makes up the foundations of international humanitarian law. um, it emphasizes that children, women, the wounded, etc., they are not to be targeted, and yet they are the ones who are being targeted. So I ask you, Mariam, that in terms of international humanitarian laws, in terms of the Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, first of all, are these blatant violations by Israel? And if yes, uh, they are likely to be, accountable at the International Criminal Court. So what is next for them?
Well, Sana, back to the whatever society you mentioned, being controlled and checked. A poet, she was 30 years old. She wrote to a friend 5 years ago and said she lived in Gaza. Her name is Hiba Abu Nada, and she said, "I wonder if I'm ever going to see another country, to see other people, how they live, what they do, or am I always going to be imprisoned in Gaza?" This young lady was killed in an airstrike a couple of days ago. And this is not her dream, not only her. Many thousands of Palestinians have the same dream. Are we ever going to be able to see how other people live? They see us, they see you on the TV, on the films, but they have no other experience than being at risk of being killed at any moment. And they have a saying, it's so painful. They say, "Don't worry, the rocket that's going to kill you, you're not going to hear it." So if that's the consolation you have, the only consolation you have, what kind of life is this? Back to breaches of the Geneva Convention, Amnesty International said that there are damning evidence that Israel is involved, have committed severe war crimes in the past 20 days. To name a few, bombing a hospital that's used by people displaced from the north of Gaza Strip, moved based on the advice of the Israeli army, told them, "Move to the south, you'll be safe there, we are bombing the north." And then on the trucks, when they were moving on the road from the north to the south, the air forces target them. They targeting people who are fleeing a war zone is unexcusable. What do you have to say about this? Civilians in a truck, they are in plain sight. You couldn't have been mistaken. And the army that says, I'm the fourth best army in the world, cannot say, oops, that was a mistake. That cannot be said, and it's not acceptable. Bombing the hospital, the Baptist Al Ahli hospital, 600 killed at least, and thousands injured. Bombing two churches. Oh my God, churches. Also taken as refuge by people displaced from the north of Gaza, and people whose houses have been demolished. They have no place to go. The doctors were saying people come to us for seeking medical assistance, medical help, but then they have nowhere to go. So they sleep on the corridors, they sleep in the garage, they sleep in the backyard. They have literally nowhere to go. Even the UNRWA was calling on the refugees in her institutions to leave because they are afraid that they will be bombed. But where to go? That's the biggest question. There is nowhere to go in Gaza Strip. So Amnesty International says there are damning evidence of crime wars, and I'm not going to talk about internationally banned weapons like white phosphorus. I'm not going to talk about that because it's just, I don't know. I have no words for it. But I'm going to say that since when has this stopped Israel? Since 1967, resolutions, one after the next. The Security Council, the UN Assembly, General Assembly, Geneva Convention, you name it. You name whatever convention you want to name. When has this ever stopped Israel? And this shows us why there has been a use of force on the 7th of October. Nothing have stopped them before. They have been killing, they are already still killing women and children in the West Bank. Just 2 days ago, they entered the Jenin refugee camp with 80 tanks. 80 tanks, can you imagine? That's a refugee camp, that's not a city even. 80 tanks, you can take over Cairo with 80 tanks. But a refugee camp, people are not armed there. Yeah, there are members of militant groups, but 80 tanks, can you imagine the force? Can you imagine the horror people sleep with and wake up with? It is war crimes, but will that saying it's a war crime, does it stop them? Will anyone be held accountable in Israel? That's the question. The question is not, is there a war crime? Because we know there are war crimes. There have been war crimes since the year 1967. They have buried Egyptian soldiers when they invaded Sinai in mass graves and shot them to death and buried them. Have they been held accountable? I don't think so. I haven't heard about it. Have you?
No, you're absolutely right, Mariam. I mean, they have, well, if we talk about violations of international humanitarian law, then there are so many other states and their invasions that, one can look at, which for presently, I won't go into those details, but I would say, quite openly that I am beyond disappointed with the American government as well as the British government because their perspective has been very biased in this entire scenario, and I appreciate the fact, and I said this at the very outset, that the loss of any life is a tragedy. Okay, so from my perspective, whomsoever you are, whoever, any innocent woman, child, or elderly person who's been targeted, who has been murdered, no matter which country you belong to, no matter what religion you belong to, it is a tragedy. It's something that I completely condemn. But when I see the way the escalation of this war and how Israel is going ahead with this bombardment, and when I see the growing casualties of children, and I see women on a regular basis, and then I see what's happening in terms of the White House press conferences that we see on TV, where they say that it's a war and these things are likely to happen, and then you hear some of the British politicians as well, from the Tories and the Labour Party, all of them, being very one-sided. There has been there has been sort of anti-war sentiment in Britain and America. I'm not saying that it hasn't taken place. I have actually heard many people from within America and Britain, and people from different faiths, Christians, Jews as well, who have been condemning Israel's actions. I have to be honest about that, and I don't think that anybody again, whosoever you are, who has a conscience, would say that this is a good thing. I don't think anybody would say it. So you're absolutely right, Mariam. Sorry, going back. I know that I sort of just the topic flows. It just takes you to so many different dimensions that are at stake over here. But when we talk about war crimes, we're talking about genocide, crimes against humanity, so many things that have been defined by the Rome Statute, which have been blatantly violated by Israel presently. And you're right, have we ever heard of them being held accountable? So that is a question mark. But I somehow feel, and I hope that this element of optimism has some sort of bearing, that because of this growing sentiment internationally, and I know that the European Union and the United Nations have been taking this quite seriously, do you think that in light of this and the way that the escalation is going out of control now, and despite uh, ruining probably a vast majority of Gaza, Israel continues to say that they're adamant to go ahead with this ground offensive. Do you think that there might finally be a time now where they are held accountable for war crimes? I know it's not something that you and I can answer, but I don't know if this is now becoming a possibility because of their out of control actions.
Well, I don't. The brief answer is no. No, because for someone to be held accountable, there has to be an acknowledgement that what they are doing is wrong. But when every official, even those who condemn the killing of civilians, start their talk by saying the attacks of the 7th of October were not justified, only Guterres was so honest and brave to say these did not come in vacuum. And until the international community recognizes that these did not come in vacuum, these are a result of oppression and unjustified illegal occupation that lasted 6 decades. It is the last occupation on the face of our world. And no one speaks up and says this is an occupation. They keep telling Palestinians, go back to peace. And Palestinians says, what has peace brought us? Since 1993, when there has been the Oslo Agreement, there has been an intention for peace, a serious intention, talks that declined and declined and declined until we hear, and I'm not quoting anyone because I can't remember names, Israeli officials saying, no, we do not acknowledge two-state solution. There's Israel and there's only Israel. So when the last hope fades away, then who thinks there will be accountability? No one said to Israel, no, this is wrong. You have an agreement that you were bound to by 1993 agreement. No one says that. It is not even on the news. They say, oh, continue the peace talks. We can keep talking forever. How about the people on the ground? The people who cannot leave their country, who stay on for days on the crossing, either Erez or Rafah or wherever, for days, they stay waiting for a permission to cross. They wait for the passports to come from the West Bank because that's where the official Palestinian Authority is located. They wait for weeks to get that permission. They wait for weeks for permission to go to a hospital in Jerusalem for cancer treatment. What kind of hope those people have? And then accountability, no one is talking about what Israel is really doing on the ground. What brought this issue to the surface, Sana, honestly, that brought all this attention to the Middle East are the events that took place on the 7th. And if they were strong, if the West thinks they're wrong, you actually have to go for the cause. When two people in your firm have a fight, you don't say you're wrong, you say what happened? And that question, no one is answering. Even no one is asking that question. So I don't think there will be accountability, not if the current state of affairs stay as it is.
Thanks, Mariam. Mariam, just continuing with the same line of questioning. So basically, there were two resolutions. If there might be more. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was one yesterday in the United Nations. I think that it was introduced by Russia. Can you just explain briefly as to what was that resolution? It was something to do with the humanitarian ceasefire, and then what was the conclusion of that?
Actually, Sana, in that session, there were two resolutions, one presented by, I think, the US and one presented by Russia. But I think Russia and China vetoed out the American resolution, and the Russian resolution did not gain enough support. You'd be surprised to hear that that resolution was quite similar to the Brazilian one introduced or presented a few days ago in the Security Council that gained a lot of support but was vetoed by the Americans. So why did this one didn't get enough support? I think two reasons were there. First, that the countries that abstained did not want to upset the US. And that's a big problem. Everyone feels the US is the big brother. So we don't want them to be upset with us. That's the first thing. The second thing, it came from Russia. And in light of the things we saw and the attacks we've seen in Ukraine, the West is totally against Russia. And there was no way. I was hearing the representatives of the states talking. I was like feeling inside me, what are you doing? There's no way the West is going to accept anything that comes from Russia. So I think those are the two reasons of the failure of these decisions to be endorsed by the Security Council. So you had another part to this question. I think I failed to answer it.
No, you have answered it, Mariam. Thank you so much. Because we're just short of time, so I'm just going to quickly touch on some of the more important things. So, well, all of it has been extremely important, Mariam. Obviously, the topic of today's webinar was the plight of children. And the children, as UNICEF rightly highlighted, are the ones who suffer the most because they're completely innocent. They don't know what's happening. And just the thought of those noises, these bombs and the sudden bombardment, it's for adults like myself, just the thought. And thanks be to God that I've never heard anything of that sort so far in my life, and I hope and pray to the Almighty that I never do. But for these tiny little children who are hearing all of this, can we just talk a little bit about the impact of that? I actually wanted to ask you about the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Rome Statute. But again, if you want to elaborate a little on that, but if you could focus more on the psychological impact that this war is going to
Yes,
have. Yeah.
of course. About the Rome Convention and all the other conventions, they talk about children deserve special protection. And I highlight special protection in the time of war. And yesterday, we've seen the lead journalist of Al Jazeera channel burying his 6 weeks old grandchild. And if a 6 weeks baby being buried after bombing, if a 6 weeks old baby does not deserve special protection, who does? We have seen over 3,000 children killed in these attacks. And Israel says that it have attacked or targeted 200 military targets in Gaza. And the spokesman for the Ministry of Interior says, let journalists in and let Israel show us where are those military targets that you have targeted. The airstrikes only targeted houses, women and children, and shelters for refugees. So obviously, there's complete disregard of children. Those are dead, God bless their souls. But how about the survivors? I've read a paper talking about Gaza, saying that 80% of the population, 80% of the children suffer from deep depression. Depression needs very special care, with no prospects for a better future. With this continuing, with you being 2 years old, starting your life, having your first steps without a family. A friend of mine, she's Palestinian Egyptian, I met her a couple of days ago. She was crying her heart out because over 50 members of her family died in the attacks. 4 generations, no one is left. And you find a baby surviving, and the whole family, the extended family, is gone. What does this child has to live for? He will grow up to find nobody even shares the same name with him, the same family name. This needs special care, and this falls mainly on the neighboring countries to provide psychological care, medical care, facilities for the children to lighten up the weight of the crisis they are living on in day to day. And in this occasion, I take the opportunity to make a call for all governments that has Palestinian students living and studying in their countries. In Egypt, some charity organizations have been able to locate, to identify more than 6,000 Palestinian students from Gaza studying in Egypt. And those people are cut suddenly from their families. Families died. There's no contact. There's no money. There's no emotional support. A person on his own. You and myself who have lived abroad, we know what it feels to live away from your family and suddenly losing everything. Those students has to be identified and given full support. So to finish their studies, to go back to their country when this ends, because these people are the ones who can most help the ones left alive and suffering. They know the suffering, but they have the means to help. And they are the best situated to offer this help because they truly share the sentiment. You and myself and our audience and everyone, we share it at the distance. But they share it actually, they have lost families and suffered this horror one day or more than one day in their life. So supporting the Palestinian population of students outside Palestine is crucial to helping resolve these issues in the future. Psychological problems are not going to be vanish on the day fire ceases or the war stops. It takes effort, it takes people, it takes something beyond medical supplies. And the first way to provide this is help Palestinians that we can help to have as much normal life as we can. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over the time allocated.
No, not at all, Mariam. Thank you so much for that. Again, that was very enlightening. And, we're talking about those people, those Palestinians abroad who can receive, psychiatric treatment. But then what about those who are still on the ground? What will become of them? And this is something that they'll have to live with for the rest of their lives. You're right, an entire family perishing with only one child surviving. What is the future of that child? What is that child going to grow up to do or to imagine? And especially we've seen these small children, they have been crying. I saw a footage of this small girl running to some of the medical workers, and she said that, no, that's my mother. And he tried to comfort, and she said, no, that's my mother. I recognize her hair. And that was so painful, just to see. It's, again, you're right that we can empathize from a distance, but if you're actually there on the ground, you're witnessing this, it's happened with you. It's just so hard to say what can be done. It's horrible. It's disgusting. Okay, so sorry, Mariam, because we are now running out of time. Just two last questions from me. You have been great so far. I understand there was a peace summit in Cairo very recently, and I saw some, um, uh, eminent personalities like the King of Jordan and others. I think the Qatari representative, etc. So, what were the conclusions of this summit?
Well, what we heard the spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Egypt said about this summit that the Western deploys or representatives refused to talk about ceasefire. They even refused to put that on the table. Unfortunately, there was no joint statement issued by this summit because there was no agreement. So we see singular voices talking about humanitarian aid or that this is horrible. But when it comes to serious positions on signing a declaration, that doesn't happen. And it didn't happen in the Cairo summit, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think what's needed at this stage is collective action, and until and unless we don't have that collective action, then again, as these predictions are taking place of the Third World War, we don't know what exactly is it going to culminate in. And the problem is that every minute that we speak, something or the other is happening. The situation's worsening. I think the European Union asked for a humanitarian pause. And I think that Britain, I don't know if Britain did or they didn't, but they keep changing their statements every day. But there have been calls for that pause, and yet, Israel just keeps pressing on, and the threats keep coming every hour that the ground offensive is going to start, despite knowing that there's really nothing left over there. I mean, it's just such a horrible situation. I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, there must be over 20 or so hospitals that are now not operating, probably more. And the ones that are operating, the fuel is about to run out. There isn't any fuel that is being allowed to enter. So, and we also heard on the news that, many hospitals do not even have anesthesia now. They're just operating in the middle of the streets without anesthesia. So it's just like I said, a modern day horror story. And I just had one last question, Mariam, which was to do with the, political asylum that uh, post this conflict. And I hope and pray to God that this comes to an end somehow, a miracle occurs. Will the people from Gaza, because it's going to take decades, from my understanding, for the infrastructure to be rebuilt. So, will the neighboring countries give these people any kind of asylum?
Well, asylum reminds everyone of the Nakba of 1948, when Palestinians were displaced, forced out of their villages and cities and houses, carrying nothing but what they're wearing, and they never returned. I don't think Palestinians are going to accept, they don't even want it. I've seen a man saying, I came out of the rebel and I buried my 8 children, and I'm going to now sleep in the ruins of my house. This kind of person is not going to take asylum, even if it is offered to him in Britain, not just in Egypt or the desert of Sinai. There is a misunderstanding of the spirit of the Palestinian people, Sana, and that's a big problem. Because I'm sorry, I'm going to take a minute to explain this. Palestinian people have nothing to lose. And the other side has everything to lose. When you have nothing to lose, you don't mind to die. Dying actually might be considered a blessing. The only thing they have is their dignity for standing up against that giant that's killing them. They're not going to be stripped away from them. They are going to stay. And thinking about asylum, there's a strong position among Arab countries that this is not going to allow, we're not going to allow another Nakba. And the Egyptian president stance on this was very clear. He said, this is not going to happen, and it is not going to happen in Egypt. So the talks about this are just talks from the West, and we believe there's a lot of pressure on Egypt to accept this, but we support the Egyptian position, and we urge that there be, instead of asylum, there be aid, there be money, there be workers going into Gaza Strip, helping to rebuild it. It is not a miracle. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the cities were built again by the will of power, the power of will, and the help of others. And if we Arabs and Muslims cannot help our brothers and sisters, and I don't say brothers and sisters in a figurative way, thousands of families have members of the family in Gaza and the other way in Egypt, and I believe in many, many Arab countries. So they deserve our aid to stay, not to leave. Thank you.
Well said, Mariam. And I completely agree with what you're saying, that when you have lost everything and you've lost your entire family, then what charm do you have to move anywhere? You're right, forget about Britain. I don't think anybody from Gaza would want to go to Britain after all of this, to be very honest with you. As much as I love England, yeah, I spent my entire childhood there. And as far as their political stances are concerned, I'm sorry, but there are many that I completely disagree with. They're absolutely uncalled for. So I totally agree with you that I think psychologically, again, your mindset would be, if 10 people or more than that from my family have died, it makes no difference whether what am I living for? And if I'm living
Exactly.
for something, it's actually probably to help those around me who are still left, and you wouldn't want to leave them and move anywhere. So yeah, that is definitely something worth thinking about. Mariam, this was an absolute pleasure. As I said, it has been so wonderful seeing you and talking to you after all these years. Although I have to say that under very painful and dark circumstances. But your entire talk has been extremely enlightening. Please go ahead. You're going to say something.
I was going to say I share all the sentiments you're expressing now, Sana. I feel great reconnecting with you, discussing this with someone who shared with me the background of loving England for the memories we have, but now feeling ashamed of the stance it takes, and feeling sympathy to those suffering for no reason, absolutely no reason and no excuse. So thank you for expressing what I was having on my mind as you spoke. Thank you. Go ahead. I interrupted you.
Thank you. No, you didn't, Mariam. You have been brilliant. I mean, I say this, and we're still live. You have been one of the best guest speakers that I've had so far. And the way you've explained everything, historically speaking, what's happening presently in terms of actual stories that you're privy to, it has been very, very informative, and it has been an eye opener, as painful as it is. But these are things that we need to know of. I'm going to try and conclude with two quotations, and these are anti-war quotations. One is by Gandhi. So was not war itself a crime against God and humanity, and therefore were not all those who sanctioned, engineered, and conducted wars war criminals? Question mark. And people know who Gandhi was. He was a peace-loving leader and somebody who did not believe in violence, who did not believe in any kind of wickedness. So that's one. The other, of course, everybody knows Martin Luther King Jr. Nothing much for me to say except that his quotation, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I think that I completely believe in that, and I know so do you, Mariam. So with that, Mariam, again, I thank you for your time, for sparing so much of time. And obviously, as we speak, I don't know what has happened on the news. I think when we log off and we go back to our screens, I don't know what else are we going to find in the coming days, but we can only hope and pray to God. And I think obviously, Mariam, I'll ask you for your concluding words, but what I'll say to the audience is that remember that being silent and not speaking out about any kind of injustice is also not okay. So even if we are far, we can't help those who need help the most at the moment. The least we can do is to at least talk about it and make people aware of the fact that this injustice exists. Mariam, any concluding words before we call it a day?
Yes, and thank you. The thing you said was the very cause that made me agree, besides seeing you and talking to you, reconnecting, that made me agree to this webinar, that we need to highlight the injustice. If we don't do that, we are privy to it, we accept it. Silence is not acceptable at a point of history like this. And I'd like to conclude my concluding remark with a verse of poetry that most Arabs know, and it explains the part of the psychology in Gaza today. It says, if death is inevitable, it's a shame to die a coward. That's what they think. And we have to understand this to be able to help them to live with dignity. Thank you.
That was very beautiful. If you want, you can say it in Arabic as well, Mariam, for those who understand Arabic. Go ahead.
Yes, it says, إذا لم يكن من الموت بد فمن العار أن تموت جبانا. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us and for listening to us so patiently. If you have any questions for Mariam and for myself, you can always connect with us on LinkedIn. We're available. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment section, and we'll get back to you. For more information on VLA, you can have a look at the website www.vla.com.pk, or you can also have a look at this Facebook page. This video is going to be on Facebook, and it's also going to be uploaded on YouTube. With that, I thank the viewers and I thank you so much, Mariam.
Thank you, Sana.